The rain in Seattle did not fall, it hammered. It was a relentless gray assault against the reinforced glass of St. Jude's Trauma Center, blurring the city lights into streaks of neon and despair. Inside Bay 4, the air smelled of antiseptic, copper, and the sharp, electric tang of fear. The monitors were screaming, a chaotic symphony of alarms that most people would find paralyzing. But for Alina Vance, the noise was just data. She stood in the corner of the trauma bay, her hands clasped loosely behind her back, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on the man thrashing on the gurney. He was large, too large for the bed, his muscles coiled like steel cables beneath skin that was rapidly turning the color of ash. His vitals were crashing, blood pressure dropping, heart rate spiking then stuttering, oxygen saturation plummeting. Dr. Marcus Thorne, the attending physician on duty, wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of a gloved hand. He was a man who wore his arrogance like a tailored suit, expensive, ill-fitting on anyone else, but perfectly cut for his ego. He looked at the patient, then at the nurses, and finally his gaze landed on Alina. He didn't see a colleague, he saw an obstacle. A quiet, unassuming woman in scrubs that were slightly too big, hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to pull the expression off her face. She had been at St. Jude's for 6 months, and in that time she had spoken fewer than 500 words. She was efficient. She was invisible, and to Marcus she was beneath notice. "Get me another line," Marcus barked, his voice cutting through the din. "He's bleeding out internally. I need access now." Alina moved. She didn't rush. Rushing was for amateurs. Rushing was for people who didn't understand the geometry of panic. She stepped forward, her movements fluid and precise, and placed a hand on the patient's arm, not to restrain him, but to assess. Her fingers found the radial pulse, faint and thready. She looked at the IV site in the patient's antecubital fossa. It was blown. The vein had collapsed under the pressure of the previous attempts. "The peripheral lines are failed," Alina said. Her voice was low, calm, devoid of urgency. It was a statement of fact, not a plea for help. Marcus spun around, his eyes narrowing. "I don't need a diagnosis, Vance. I need you to shut up and hold the restraints. Let the residents handle the lines." "The resident tried 3 times," Alina said, her eyes still on the patient's pale face. "The veins are sclerotic. He's a veteran, likely dehydrated prior to arrival. Peripheral access is impossible without a cut-down, which will take 10 minutes we don't have." Marcus laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, cruel in its dismissiveness. "And you know this how? Did you read his mind while you were standing there pretending to be furniture? Step back, now." The room went still for a fraction of a second. The other nurses exchanged glances. They knew Alina was right. They had seen the resident struggle. They had seen the bruising forming on the patient's arms, but they also knew Marcus Thorne. He was the golden boy of the emergency department, the one who brought in donations, the one who gave interviews to the local news. Challenging him was career suicide, so they stayed silent. They let the hierarchy hold. Alina stepped back. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She simply returned to her position in the corner, her hands clasped behind her back, her eyes tracking the monitor. She watched the numbers drop, 80 over 50, 75 over 45. The heart rate was erratic, fluttering like a bird trapped in a cage. "Push 2 units of O negative, Marcus ordered. "And get me surgery on the line. Tell them I'm bringing in a traumatic hemorrhage, possible splenic rupture." "He's not stabilizing," the charge nurse, Sarah, said softly. She looked at Marcus, then at Alina. There was a hesitation in her voice, a crack in the facade of obedience. "I said push it," Marcus shouted. Alina closed her eyes for a brief second. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she wasn't in a hospital in Seattle. She was in a dusty tent in Kandahar. The air was thick with dust and the smell of burning diesel. The man on the table wasn't a stranger, he was a brother. And she wasn't a nurse, she was the only thing standing between life and death. She opened her eyes. The memory receded, but the instinct remained. The instinct to act when others froze. The instinct to save, regardless of rank. But she did not move. She had learned painfully that in this world, competence without permission was insubordination. And insubordination was punished. So she waited. She watched the man die inch by inch, because the man in charge refused to listen to the woman in the corner. St. Jude's Trauma Center was a fortress of modern medicine, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that rose above the rainy streets of downtown Seattle. It was a place where miracles were manufactured daily, where science battled chaos and often won. But like any fortress, it had its gates, its guards, and its rigid social order. At the top sat the attending physicians, the gods of the ER, wielding scalpels and prescriptions like scepters. Below them were the residents, the apprentices, eager to prove themselves, willing to sacrifice sleep, sanity, and sometimes ethics for a shred of approval. And at the bottom, forming the foundation upon which the entire structure rested, were the nurses. Alina Vance belonged to that bottom tier, or at least that was where everyone placed her. She was 34 years old, though she looked older. Her face was lined with a fatigue that sleep couldn't fix, and her eyes held a depth of sorrow that made people uncomfortable. She kept to herself. She arrived 15 minutes early for every shift. She left 15 minutes late. She never attended the happy hours. She never complained about the double shifts. She never shared stories about her weekend. She was a ghost in scrubs, present but unseen, useful but unvalued. To Marcus Thorne, Alina was an annoyance. He was a man who believed in the visible hierarchy of medicine. He liked nurses who smiled, who laughed at his jokes, who affirmed his brilliance. Alina did none of those things. She was competent, yes, too competent perhaps. She caught errors before they happened. She anticipated needs before they were voiced. But she did it silently, without fanfare, without seeking credit. And to a narcissist like Marcus, silence was an insult. It implied that she didn't need his validation. It implied that she was operating on a level he couldn't reach. "You're too quiet, Vance," Marcus had told her during her first week, leaning against the nurse's station, sipping a latte that cost more than her hourly wage. "People think you're judging them. You should smile more. It makes the patients feel better, and it makes me feel like you're part of the team." Alina had looked at him, her expression neutral. "I am here to care for patients, Dr. Thorne, not to perform emotions for staff comfort." Marcus had bristled. The rejection stung because it was true. He didn't want a partner, he wanted an audience. And Alina refused to clap. Since then, the microaggressions had become a routine. Marcus would assign her the most difficult patients, the ones with complex histories and volatile behaviors, knowing she would handle them with grace. Then, when she succeeded, he would take the credit in the charts. When she failed, because no one is perfect, he would document it in excruciating detail, creating a paper trail of incompetence that didn't exist. He mocked her outdated techniques, her refusal to use the new, flashy apps that streamlined documentation but compromised patient privacy. He called her old school with a sneer, as if efficiency and thoroughness were relics of a bygone era. The other nurses sympathized with her, but they were afraid. Marcus had power. He controlled schedules. He wrote recommendations for nursing school promotions. He had the ear of the hospital administrator, a man named Richard Sterling who cared more about budget metrics than bedside manner. To stand with Alina was to risk your own career. So they offered sympathetic smiles in the break room, whispered apologies when Marcus was cruel, but in the trauma bay, they followed his lead. Alina accepted it. She had accepted worse. She had accepted the weight of command, the burden of decisions that haunted her dreams, the loss of friends who didn't make it home. Compared to the sands of foreign battlefields, the petty tyranny of a hospital administrator was manageable. It was noise, and Alina had learned to tune out the noise. But there were breadcrumbs, small, subtle clues that hinted at a different life, a different identity. Alina's hands, for instance, they were scarred. Not the small nicks and cuts of a nurse, but long, thin white lines that ran across her knuckles and forearms, shrapnel scars or maybe knife wounds. When asked, she said she had been in a car accident years ago. No one pressed further. Then there was her physical fitness. She moved with a predatory grace, a controlled economy of motion that was unusual for someone who spent 12 hours on their feet. She could lift a 200-pound patient with ease, using leverage and technique rather than brute force. She noticed things others missed. The slight tremor in a patient's hand that indicated withdrawal. The subtle change in breathing pattern that signaled a pneumothorax before the X-ray confirmed it. She spoke 3 languages fluently, English, Spanish, and Pashto, though she rarely used the last one. When a confused elderly patient had wandered into the ER muttering in Dari, Alina had calmed him down in seconds, speaking to him in his native tongue with a warmth that transformed her face. Marcus had watched from across the room, suspicious, but had said nothing. And then there was the tattoo. It was hidden under her left sleeve near her wrist. Most people never saw it. But once when she was changing gloves, a resident had caught a glimpse of black ink. An anchor? A compass? He hadn't been sure. Alina had pulled her sleeve down quickly, her eyes flashing with a warning that silenced any question before it could be asked. These details piled up, forming a puzzle that no one at St. Jude S was trying to solve. They saw what they expected to see, a quiet, mediocre nurse who was lucky to have a job. They didn't see the warrior hiding in plain sight. They didn't see the woman who had once held the line when the world was falling apart. They didn't see the call sign that echoed in the minds of men who respected power. The crisis arrived on a Tuesday night just as the shift was hitting its peak. The ER was full. Every bed was occupied. The hallway was lined with gurneys. The air conditioning was struggling against the body heat of hundreds of anxious people. Alina was in Bay 2, dressing a laceration on a child's knee when the ambulance doors burst open. Paramedics rushed in, shouting codes. Trauma 1, male, mid-30s, GSW to the chest, BP 60 palp, HR 140, intubated in the field, massive hemothorax. The team swarmed. Marcus was already there, snapping on gloves, his face set in a mask of focused intensity. This was his moment, a gunshot wound, high stakes, high visibility. He loved these cases, they made him feel alive. "Get me a chest tube tray," Marcus yelled. "Vance, get over here, hold the light." Alina dropped her supplies and moved to Bay 1. She didn't run, she flowed. She grabbed the trauma light and positioned it, her eyes scanning the patient. He was young, military haircut, even though he was in civilian clothes, tattoos on his neck. Dog tags around his neck, tucked under his shirt. "Who is he?" Alina asked, her voice low. "John Doe," the paramedic said, breathless. "Found in an alley, no ID, just the tags." Marcus ignored the question. "Scalpel now." He made the incision. Blood poured out dark and thick. The suction canister filled rapidly. The patient's blood pressure continued to drop, 50 palp, 40 palp. "He's exsanguinating," Sarah, the charge nurse, said, her voice rising in panic. "We're losing him." "Clamp," Marcus shouted. "I can't see the source, there's too much blood." Alina watched. She saw the entry wound, low left thorax, exit wound, high right back. The trajectory suggested damage to the lung, possibly the heart, definitely major vessels, but she also saw something else. The patient's pupils were unequal. One was blown, fixed and dilated. "Dr. Thorne," Alina said. "His pupils, he has a head injury, increased intracranial pressure." Marcus didn't look up. "Focus on the chest, Vance. I don't have time for neuro checks." "If you intubate him further or increase positive pressure, you'll herniate his brainstem," Alina said. Her voice was steady but firm. "You need to decompress the chest manually before you proceed, and you need to check for tension pneumothorax on the right side." Marcus paused. For a second, doubt flickered in his eyes, but then his ego took over. He couldn't be wrong. He was the doctor, she was the nurse. "I know what I'm doing," he snapped. "Suction, more suction." He continued to dig into the chest cavity. The monitors screamed. The heart rate dropped to 30, then 20, then flatline. "Asystole," Sarah cried. "Start compressions." Marcus stepped back, frustrated. "Damn it, start ACLS protocol, epinephrine 1 milligram." Alina didn't move to start compressions. She looked at the patient's chest. She saw the subtle asymmetry. The right side was distended. Trachea deviated to the left. Tension pneumothorax. The air was trapped in the chest, crushing the heart, preventing it from filling. Compressions would do nothing. Epinephrine would do nothing. The patient needed a needle decompression, immediately. "Dr. Thorne," Alina said. "It's a tension pneumo, needle decompression, now." Marcus turned to her, his face red with anger. "I said start compressions. Are you deaf?" "He's dead if you compress," Alina said. "The heart can't pump if it's compressed by air. Let me decompress." "No," Marcus shouted. "Follow orders." The room froze. The other staff looked between Marcus and Alina. The clock was ticking. Every second without circulation was brain damage. Every second without decompression was death. Alina looked at Marcus. She saw the stubbornness, the fear of being wrong, the need for control, and she made a choice. It was a choice that went against every rule of hospital protocol. It was a choice that could end her career. But it was the only choice that could save the man on the table. She stepped forward. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't wait for an order. She grabbed a large-bore angiocatheter from the tray. "Vance, stop," Marcus yelled. Alina ignored him. She located the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was calm. She inserted the needle. A hiss of air escaped, loud and sharp. The patient's chest fell. The trachea shifted back to the midline. "Resume compressions," Alina said, her voice commanding. "Now." Sarah, shocked but instinctive, began chest compressions. Marcus stood there stunned. He watched the monitor. The flat line persisted for 10 seconds, then 20. Then a blip, a QRS complex, then another, sinus rhythm, weak but present. Blood pressure spiked, 70-40, 80-50. The room was silent, except for the rhythmic beep of the monitor and Sarah's heavy breathing. Everyone looked at Alina. She was holding the needle in place, her face impassive. She had just disobeyed a direct order from the attending physician. She had performed a procedure outside her scope of practice. She had saved the patient's life. And she had humiliated Marcus Thorne in front of his entire team. Marcus stared at her. His eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of shock and rage. He couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe she had dared. He couldn't believe she had been right. "Get out," he whispered. Alina removed the needle. She secured the site. She stepped back. "Get out of my trauma bay," Marcus said, louder this time. "Now." Alina nodded. She didn't argue. She didn't explain. She simply walked out of Bay 1, past the staring residents, past the shocked nurses, and into the hallway. She went to the supply closet, restocked her gloves, and returned to Bay 2 to finish dressing the child's knee. Her hands did not shake. Her heart did not race. She had done what needed to be done. The consequences would come later. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Marcus did not wait until the end of the shift. He waited until the patient was stabilized and transferred to the ICU. Then he marched to the nurse's station, where Alina was charting. "Administrator's office," Marcus said. "Now." Alina finished her sentence. She saved the file. She stood up. She followed him. The walk to the administrator's office was long and silent. Marcus walked ahead, his shoulders stiff with indignation. Alina walked behind, her steps even, her gaze forward. She knew what was coming. She had faced courts-martial. She had faced interrogation. This was mild by comparison. Richard Sterling, the hospital administrator, was a man who valued order above all else. He sat behind a large mahogany desk, his face pinched and serious. Marcus stood beside him, recounting the events with dramatic flair. He painted Alina as reckless, insubordinate, dangerous. He claimed she had undermined his authority, jeopardized patient safety, and violated hospital policy. He demanded her immediate termination. Sterling listened, nodding occasionally. He looked at Alina. "Is this true, Ms. Vance? Did you perform a needle decompression without a physician's order?" "Yes," Alina said. "Why?" "The patient had a tension pneumothorax. Dr. Thorne was preparing to perform chest compressions, which would have been fatal. Decompression was the only viable intervention." "Did you attempt to persuade Dr. Thorne?" "I informed him of the diagnosis. He refused to act." Sterling sighed. He looked at Marcus. "Marcus, is it true that you refused to decompress despite the signs?" Marcus hesitated. He couldn't lie outright, not with the medical record, but he could spin it. "I was in the process of assessing the situation. Ms. Vance jumped the gun. She acted prematurely. It was a lucky guess. If she had missed, she could have punctured the lung further. It was reckless." Sterling turned back to Alina. "Ms. Vance, you are a nurse. Your role is to assist physicians, not to override them. Regardless of the outcome, your actions were insubordinate. We cannot have staff members taking liberties with medical protocols. It creates liability. It creates chaos." "I saved the patient's life," Alina said quietly. "You violated protocol," Sterling corrected. "And in doing so, you undermined the chain of command. That is unacceptable." He opened a drawer and pulled out a form. "I am placing you on unpaid administrative leave, effective immediately, pending a review of your employment status. Hand over your badge." Alina looked at the badge. It was a small piece of plastic, but it represented her livelihood. It represented her anonymity. Without it, she was exposed. But she didn't fight. She didn't beg. She unclipped the badge and placed it on the desk. "Will I be allowed to return?" she asked. "That depends on the review," Sterling said. "But I wouldn't get your hopes up. We have zero tolerance for insubordination." Alina nodded. She turned and walked out of the office. She walked through the hospital, past the departments she had served for 6 months, past the nurses who looked away, unable to meet her eyes, past the residents who whispered behind their hands. She walked out the front doors into the rain. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, letting the water soak into her scrubs. She felt cold, not because of the rain, but because of the injustice. She had done the right thing. She had saved a life, and she had been punished for it. But as she stood there, a black SUV pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down. A man in a suit looked out. He didn't speak. He just watched her. Then the window rolled up and the SUV drove away. Alina frowned. She didn't recognize the car, but she recognized the feeling of being watched, the feeling of history catching up. She walked to her car, a nondescript sedan parked in the far corner of the lot. She got in, started the engine, and drove home. She didn't know it yet, but her exile was temporary. The storm was just beginning. If you are enjoying this story of quiet strength facing loud injustice, please take a moment to hit the like button. It helps us bring more narratives of resilience and vindication to your screen. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing to join our community of storytellers. We have many more tales of hidden heroes waiting to be told. The next 3 days were a blur of silence. Alina stayed in her apartment, a small, sparse unit overlooking the Puget Sound. She didn't watch TV. She didn't scroll through social media. She cleaned, she organized, she prepared. She knew that St. Jude's would not reinstate her. Sterling was a bureaucrat, and bureaucrats protected their own. Marcus was a star, and stars were protected. Alina was expendable. But she wasn't worried about the job. She was worried about the patient. The John Doe from the trauma bay, she had seen the dog tags, she had seen the tattoos, she knew he was military, special operations likely. And she knew that when special operators went missing, people noticed, people with power, people who didn't take no for an answer. On the 4th day, her phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Ms. Vance," a voice said, deep, gravelly, authoritative. "This is Commander James Holloway, United States Navy. I'd like to speak with you." Alina's heart skipped a beat. Holloway, the name was familiar, SEAL Team 6. Dev Grew, legend. "About what?" she asked. "About the patient you saved on Tuesday, and about why you're no longer at St. Jude's." "I'm on administrative leave," Alina said. "I know," Holloway said. "I also know that you performed a needle decompression against orders, and I know that you're former corpsman, Fleet Marine Force, attached to 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, and before that you were with MARSOC. Call sign, Whisper." Alina closed her eyes. The past had found her. "Where are you?" Holloway asked. "My apartment." "I'm sending a car. Be ready in 10 minutes. The line went dead. Alina stood up. She went to her closet and pulled out a box from the back. Inside was a uniform, not scrubs, not civilian clothes, a dress uniform, navy blue, medals pinned to the chest. Ribbons that told a story of service, sacrifice, and survival. She didn't put it on, not yet, but she looked at it. And for the first time in 6 months, she felt a spark of pride. 10 minutes later, the same black SUV from the hospital pulled up. This time, the door opened. Holloway stepped out. He was older than his reputation suggested, with gray hair and a face weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes were sharp, intelligent, dangerous. "Ms. Vance," he said, nodding respectfully, "thank you for coming." "I didn't have a choice," Alina said. Holloway smiled faintly. "None of us ever do. Get in." They drove in silence. Holloway didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He had her file. He knew everything, where she had served, what she had done, why she had left the military, the PTSD, the burnout, the desire for a quiet life, the attempt to hide in plain sight. "You did good work," Holloway said finally. "Saving that operator, he's one of ours, Lieutenant Commander David Ross. He was undercover, investigating a trafficking ring. He got made, took a bullet for his cover." "Is he okay?" Alina asked. "He's stable, thanks to you. The doctors at St. Jude's say he would have died on the table if you hadn't acted. They're calling it a medical miracle. But I know it wasn't a miracle. It was training. It was instinct. It was you." Alina looked out the window. Dr. Thorne didn't see it that way. "No," Holloway said. "He didn't, and that's a problem, because Lieutenant Commander Ross is not just any patient. He's a hero, and the person who saved him deserves respect, not termination." "What are you going to do?" Alina asked. Holloway turned to her. His eyes were cold. "I'm going to ensure that justice is served, not just for you, but for the integrity of the institution that failed you. We're going back to St. Jude's, and you're going to show them who you really are." Pause. The return to St. Jude's was not quiet. Holloway did not enter through the front doors. He entered through the executive entrance, flanked by 2 other men. In suits, they moved with purpose, ignoring the receptionist, bypassing security. They went straight to the top. Richard Sterling was in a meeting with the board of directors when Holloway walked in. The room went silent. Sterling looked up, annoyed. "Can I help you?" "Commander James Holloway," Holloway said, placing a card on the table. "United States Navy. I'm here regarding the treatment of one of my officers and the wrongful termination of one of your employees." Sterling paled. He recognized the name. Everyone did. Holloway was a national figure, a decorated war hero, a man who had the ear of the Pentagon. Mr. Holloway, Sterling stammered, this is a private meeting. Not anymore, Holloway said. Sit down. Sterling sat. The board members watched, confused and intrigued. Ms. Alina Vance, Holloway said, former Navy corpsman, former MARSOC operator, saved the life of Lieutenant Commander David Ross on Tuesday night, was subsequently fired for insubordination. Is that correct? Sterling swallowed hard. It's complicated. Ms. Vance violated protocol. She acted without authorization. She saved a life, Holloway said. Your protocol nearly killed him, and your administrator punished the savior. That is not complicated. That is negligence, and it is an insult to the uniform. Holloway turned to the board. Gentlemen, lady, you have a choice. You can continue to protect an incompetent physician who values ego over patient safety, or you can rectify this mistake. Restore Ms. Vance's position, apologize, and ensure that Dr. Thorne is held accountable for his actions. And if we do? Sterling asked, his voice trembling. Holloway smiled. It was not a nice smile. Then I will release the full medical records of this incident to the press. I will highlight the negligence. I will highlight the bias. And I will ensure that St. Jude's becomes a case study in medical malpractice. Your funding will dry up. Your reputation will be destroyed, and you will lose far more than one nurse. The room was deadly silent. Sterling looked at the board looked at Sterling. They knew Holloway was right. They knew they couldn't fight him. Do it, the chairman of the board said. Restore her position immediately. Sterling nodded, defeated. Yes, sir. Holloway turned to leave. One more thing, I want a meeting with Dr. Thorne and Ms. Vance in the trauma bay 1 hour from now, don't be late. Pause. News travels fast in a hospital. By the time Alina walked back into St. Jude's, escorted by Holloway, the entire staff knew something was happening. Whispers flew through the halls. Rumors swirled. Was she being sued? Was she being arrested? Was she returning? Alina wore her civilian clothes, jeans, a simple sweater. She looked small next to Holloway's imposing figure, but she walked with her head high. She didn't look at the staff. She didn't acknowledge the stares. She focused on the destination, Bay 1. Marcus Thorne was waiting. He had been summoned by Sterling, who had told him vaguely that there was a complaint from a high-profile visitor. Marcus assumed it was a wealthy donor. He preened, adjusting his tie, practicing his charming smile. He was ready to dazzle. When Holloway and Alina entered the trauma bay, Marcus's smile faltered. He recognized Holloway. Everyone did. But he didn't understand why he was there, and he certainly didn't understand why Alina was with him. Dr. Thorne, Holloway said. His voice boomed in the small room. Commander Holloway, Marcus said, extending his hand. An honor. What brings you to St. Jude's? Holloway didn't shake his hand. He looked at Marcus with disdain. I'm here to discuss the care of Lieutenant Commander David Ross. Marcus blinked. The John Doe? Yes, a challenging case, but we stabilized him. My team did excellent work. Your team, Holloway asked, or Ms. Vance's work? Marcus glanced at Alina. He sneered. Ms. Vance is no longer employed here. She was terminated for misconduct. She was terminated for saving your patient's life, Holloway said, because you refused to listen to her, because you were too arrogant to admit you were wrong. Marcus's face reddened. That's absurd. I'm the attending physician. I make the decisions. She is a nurse. She follows orders. She is a former MARSOC operator, Holloway said, with more combat medical experience than you have years of practice. She recognized a tension pneumothorax when you missed it. She acted when you hesitated, and she saved a Navy SEAL. The room went silent. The nurses who had gathered outside the bay heard every word. The residents stopped charting. The air grew thick with tension. Marcus laughed nervously. A SEAL? Come on, he was a John Doe, a gang member, probably. Holloway stepped closer. He pulled out a photo. He held it up. It was a picture of David Ross in uniform shaking hands with the president. This is Lieutenant Commander David Ross, Holloway. Why said Navy SEAL, Medal of Honor recipient, and he is alive because of Ms. Vance, not because of you. Marcus stared at the photo. His face drained of color. He realized with dawning horror that he had messed with the wrong person. He had fired the woman who had saved a national hero. I didn't know, Marcus stammered. Ignorance is not an excuse, Holloway said. Incompetence is not an excuse. Arrogance is not an excuse. Holloway turned to Alina. Ms. Vance, would you like to say anything? Alina looked at Marcus. She didn't look angry, she didn't look triumphant, she looked disappointed. You failed your patient, she said softly. You failed your team and you failed yourself. Medicine is not about ego, it's about service. Remember that. Marcus looked down. He couldn't meet her eyes. Holloway turned to the crowd of staff. Ms. Vance is reinstated, effective immediately, with a promotion to senior clinical nurse specialist, and Dr. Thorne is suspended pending a full review of his conduct. If any further incidents occur, he will be terminated. A murmur went through the crowd. Cheers erupted from the nurses. Sarah hugged Alina. The residents looked at Marcus with new eyes. The hierarchy had shifted. The god had fallen. The ghost had risen. If this moment of vindication resonated with you, please share this video with someone who needs to hear that truth always finds a way to surface. Your support helps us keep these stories alive. And don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into characters who refuse to stay silent. The weeks that followed were transformative for St. Jude S. The incident became a legend. The story of the quiet nurse who saved a seal spread beyond the hospital walls. It was picked up by local news, then national news. Alina became a symbol of integrity, of competence, of the power of humility. But Alina didn't seek the spotlight. She declined interviews. She refused book deals. She returned to work, but things were different. She was no longer invisible. She was respected. The staff listened to her. Marcus Thorne was eventually terminated after an investigation revealed a pattern of negligent behavior and bullying. He left the hospital in disgrace, his reputation shattered. Alina didn't gloat, she didn't celebrate, she simply did her job better than ever. She trained the new nurses. She taught them to look beyond the hierarchy, to trust their instincts, to prioritize the patient above all else. And she reconnected with her past. Holloway visited her occasionally. They talked about the old days, about the friends they had lost, about the burden of service. Alina found a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. She realized that she didn't need to hide, she didn't need to suppress who she was. She could be both, the nurse, the warrior, the woman. One evening, 6 months later, Alina was working the night shift. The ER was quiet, the rain was falling gently outside. A new patient came in, an elderly woman, confused, alone. Alina approached her. She spoke softly, she held her hand, she listened. And in that moment, Alina Vance was exactly where she was meant to be. Not in the shadows, not in the spotlight, but in the space between, where healing happens, where humanity connects, where silence speaks louder than words. The final confrontation, if it could be called that, happened not in a boardroom, but in the parking lot. Marcus Thorne was leaving for the last time, carrying a box of his belongings. He looked smaller, defeated. He saw Alina walking to her car. He stopped. "Alina," he said. She paused. She didn't turn around immediately. "I'm sorry," he said. The words sounded foreign in his mouth. "I was wrong about you, about everything." Alina turned. She looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the fear in his eyes, the regret. "Apology accepted," she said. "But don't do it for me. Do it for the next patient. Be better." She got into her car. She drove away. She didn't look back. The rain continued to fall, but inside the car it was warm. And for the first time in a long time, Alina Vance smiled. As we reach the end of Alina's journey, take a moment to reflect on the themes of this story. Humility, integrity, service. These are not just words, they are actions, and they matter. If you found value in this narrative, please leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. What does integrity mean to you? How have you seen quiet competence change a situation? We love hearing from our community. The story of Alina Vance is fictional, but the dynamics it portrays are real. In workplaces everywhere, there are Alinas, quiet, competent individuals who are overlooked, underestimated, and undervalued, and there are Marcuses, loud, insecure leaders who confuse authority with competence. The difference is that in stories, justice is swift. In reality, it is often slow, but it is inevitable. Truth has a way of rising, competence has a way of shining, and those who serve with integrity will always, eventually, be recognized. Alina's call sign was Whisper, because she didn't need to shout to be heard. Her actions spoke for her, and in the end, that was enough. Thank you for spending this time with us. If you enjoyed this 60-minute narrative experience, please consider supporting the channel by becoming a member. Members get early access to scripts, behind-the-scenes content, and the opportunity to suggest future story topics. Your support allows us to continue crafting high-quality, advertiser-friendly content that respects your intelligence and your time. We have many more stories in the pipeline, stories of betrayal and redemption, of hidden talents and public vindications, of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Stay tuned. The next story is already being written. Until then, remember, you don't have to be the loudest person in the room to be the most powerful. You just have to be the most prepared, the most compassionate, the most true. Be the whisper that changes the world. Before you go, here is a recommendation for your next watch. If you enjoyed the emotional depth and procedural realism of this story, you might appreciate our recent upload, The Janitor Who Solved the Code. It features a similar theme of hidden competence and institutional bias, with a satisfying payoff that will leave you inspired. Click the link on your screen to continue the journey. And if you're new here, welcome. We are a community of storytellers who believe in the power of narrative to heal, to inspire, and to challenge. Subscribe to join us. Hit the bell icon to never miss an update. And share this video with someone who needs a reminder that they are seen, that they are valued, that they matter. The rain in Seattle eventually stops. The sun comes out, the city shines, and life goes on. For Alina Vance, life was good. She had her job, she had her purpose, she had her peace. And she had the knowledge that she had made a difference, not just for one patient, but for everyone who witnessed her stand. That is the power of integrity. It ripples, it spreads, it changes culture, it saves lives. So the next time you see someone being mocked, someone being overlooked, someone being silenced, remember Alina, remember that silence is not weakness, it is often strength, it is patience, it is preparation, and when the moment comes, it is action. Be ready, be competent, be kind. And never let anyone tell you that you are less than you are. We appreciate your patience and engagement throughout this long-form narrative. Creating these scripts requires extensive research, writing, and editing. If you value the effort we put into ensuring historical accuracy, where applicable, emotional resonance, and ethical storytelling, please consider liking this video. It sends a strong signal to our team that this format works. We are committed to keeping our content advertiser-friendly and safe for all audiences. No gore, no hate speech, no sensationalism, just pure, compelling storytelling. If you agree with this mission, please share that sentiment in the comments. Let us know what standards you hold for online content. As the credits roll in your mind, imagine the scene one last time. The trauma bay, the beep of the monitor, the hiss of the needle, the silence of the room, the look in Alina's eyes, calm, focused, unbreakable.